K.A., if you could start by introducing yourself and who you work for, that'd be brilliant.
Sure. I'm K.A. I'm a game scout at Fireshine Games. To those that may not know that name, I understand we did rebrand back in March. We have been around for a very long time as Sold Out. And if you don't know that name, you probably have some of our games or some of the games we've done physically on your shelf, as we are, in addition to a publisher, also a physical distributor who work with other publishers as well. So if you have played a Sniper Elite or an Overcooked or Jurassic World or something like that physically, then that's part of what we do in addition to publishing. So Fireshine Games, and I'm one of the 2 game scouts of the company.
Fab, thank you very much. And on to you, Ben.
Hello, everybody. My name's Ben Barrett. I'm the business development director at Firesquid. Goodness me, I almost said Fireshine. That would have been good. At Firesquid Games, and we're a relatively new indie publisher. We haven't actually released anything yet, which has been very entertaining when talking to developers. But we're pretty experienced. We're also a spin-off of Lightbulb Crew, who are a game developer based in France who made Other Side and a number of other games, which you may be familiar with. And if you aren't familiar with us at all, then I look forward to speaking to you in the future about your games.
Fab, thank you very much. So we're going to jump straight in. I think most people will be aware of what a publisher is, so we're not going to go too junior. But if you could, in your own words, kind of describe what you think the benefits of working with a publisher versus going it alone and doing self-publishing, that'd be great. Ben, if you could start, please.
There we go. So I think the core of it is twofold. One is we do all the stuff that you don't want to do. So if you are, you're a game developer, you have a Twitter profile, but you don't particularly, want to use it as a marketing platform, and otherwise you don't care about social media, or you don't care about marketing, or you don't want to know how to make a trailer, or you don't have time to learn Premiere along with learning Unity or Unreal or whatever, we can do all of that and way more for you. So that's like kind of the start of it. And that's one of the things that I think surprises some devs is we are just kind of there to do the stuff that you don't want to do because we know how to do it. We're good at it. And hopefully we should, powers combined, be able to make your game sell more copies through doing that stuff instead of you trying to do it yourself or hiring outside agencies that might be more expensive to do it. And then the other thing is that we have ideally more access, more contacts, more information, more knowledge when it comes to stuff that you wouldn't ever be expected to know how to do, like releasing a game physically, particularly in the case of Kay's company, particularly stuff like having the contacts at Microsoft and PlayStation and Sony and Steam and so on to get your games onto those platforms, again, easily and quickly. And a lot of it does come down to, we're going to do that stuff, and you could do that stuff yourself, but you could be adding literally years onto your development time if you tried to do all that stuff yourself. Whereas we might be able to do some of it with a 5-minute email, for example. And then finally, we give you money. We provide money so that you can run your studio, so that you can employ more people, so that you can get the services or the software that you need to make your game. And then we take a cut of the eventual game sales to make that money back. And then hopefully when the game sells a lot, everybody starts making money on top.
So quite a lot then.
Yeah.
Hey, anything to add?
I feel like you stole most of my good points here, so thank you for that. I think the thing to, and this is not to start us off on a downer, but the thing to realize that's really important about games, especially on Steam, is that something like 99.5% of games on Steam never make any profit at all. So if you want to have a decent chance at not being a part of that huge chunk, you want someone helping you. Usually a publisher is a really good choice. Sometimes you might get away with, if you have a marketing firm or someone that can at least help you get awareness, but a publisher, as Ben talked about, will do a lot more than just the marketing. And it really ties into the saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so the amount of things a publisher can bring to the table, we could probably talk the next 4 hours about just the things that people don't necessarily realize that they need to think about. And thankfully, because of people like us, they don't have to ever think about it because we'll deal with it for them. But yeah, I would do yourself a favor. If you have something awesome, you can obviously cross your fingers down for the best, but I would urge you to work with someone to try to maximize the potential of your game. And in addition to all that, sometimes, especially for a small team, it can be really helpful, instead of having 2 pairs of eyes looking at a really cool game, suddenly having 30 sets of eyes looking at a game and making it even better as a result. There's immeasurable value in that alone, I think. So ally yourself with someone, and if it's a publisher, let's talk.
Great. Thank you for that very good overview of you guys. So my next one was actually, what do you guys offer other than just capital? But I think you kind of covered that, so I'm not going to go with that one. So the next one is like choosing a publisher. I think a lot of game devs kind of have difficulty finding the right publisher for their specific game. So K.A, how would you think? How would you say that you should? What sort of things do you need to know to find the right publisher for your game?
I mean, the main thing. I mean, there are quite a few things, and I'll get the second half. Basically, there are 2 things here. Really, is that one, you need to make sure that the publisher ideally is a fit for your game, right? So if you're looking to make a certain genre, if you reach out to a publisher that has never done your genre before, they might be interested in doing it, which is awesome. We explore new genres all the time because we do a lot of different genres, whereas I know Firesquid are more specialized, and there are publishers of both types and anything in between, which is awesome. But make sure that the publisher you're looking at is actually suitable for what you're making. And if you're not sure, if they haven't done a game like that before, and we'll cover that, I'm sure, in a later question, is what to ask a publisher is, make sure that they know what that genre entails, that they know what it means to work on that genre, so that your game, if they haven't done it before, that they are suitable, in fact, to work on it. And also beyond that, make sure that they cover the platforms you do. If you're making a mobile game, maybe don't go to a publisher that only does PC, because they're very unlikely to be helpful to you or interested in that particular type of game. Look at the monetization models you're interested in. If you're doing free to play, maybe a premium only publisher isn't for you, or vice versa. So make sure that all that kind of makes sense, so that the people you work with are aligned with what you're making and can help you make it even better. And the second part of this, really, to me, is make sure that the people and the publisher are the right people you want to work with. And I'll say this to any developer, like, don't be blinded by a fancy resume or a fancy portfolio or whatever. Focus on the humans, because if you don't like the people you work with, you will have a miserable couple of years ahead of you, and nobody wants that. So make sure it's a good human fit as well.
We've lost her, haven't we? She's gone. To add on top of that, I think something, and we'll probably come into this on later questions as well, but every publisher is going to have the things that they're good at and the things that they're bad at and so on, and you should definitely make sure that you're talking to multiple ones. Sometimes a publisher will come talk to you, and if that happens and you aren't already pitching multiple publishers, I'd really recommend then just going around the houses. Find your local community, your local, like in the UK, we have the UK games industry Slack with 5,000 people in it or whatever. You can go in there and say, hey, look, I want to contact a few publishers that might want to work on my games. Look into them, see what they can do. And then the other thing is, there was a really good point, and now it's completely evaporated. I'm sure it was brilliant. I'm sure I'll think of it again later. Welcome back, Hannah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Did you guys just host yourselves for a minute? I'm really sorry.
For about 30 seconds. Yeah.
My internet it was gold. It was gold. All the best nuggets just happened.
Missed it.
So Ben, have you answered that question? Because I've kind of just missed what happened.
Yes, I added. Yeah, I added a little bit onto what Kay said, but he was really.
Okay, so I think what follows on nicely for that, I guess, is what should a game dev ask you guys when approaching you to find out if you are the right person, the right team.
So I think a lot of it comes down to it's fairly obvious stuff, what are you going to help us with? What are you going to provide? But there's a couple of pretty key questions. One is finding out the revenue share. So I mean, if you're at all experienced, this is something you should be familiar with. But this is basically, how much money are we going to get and how much money are you going to get at each stage of the process? So the way that it normally works, and maybe Kay will jump in and say, no, that's terrible, don't ever work with Firesquid. But the way that it usually works is that we take a pretty big cut until a certain amount of money has come back to us from the amount that we gave you. And then from there, it will be redistributed depending on exactly how you want it to work. But there are thousands of different ways that you can have these deals work. There's stuff like minimum guarantees where we say, okay, we're going to give you your budget and we're also going to give you X $1,000 million on top to say, this is how much money we think you're going to make. And we're willing to bet that money that you're going to make it by giving it to you now. And then there's stuff like, okay, who's going to have control of the IP? And you can move all those sliders as you like to determine which way you want things to be. Now, the thing is, like, the reason that publishers exist, the number one thing that we do, at least in my opinion, and this is quite mercenary, but this is just the truth, is we're taking risk, because we're putting the money into your studio, into your game, whatever, on the gamble that we think it's going to do well at the end. Now, the gamble is quite good because we're controlling how well it does at the end, right? Like, we're doing the marketing, we're doing the et cetera, et cetera. But so you need to know from us what stuff we're putting in to make our gamble successful, and how we've stacked the rewards in our favor and your favor. Now, none of this matters if your game is Fortnite or Vampire Survivors or whatever, because everyone just comes out of those things making more money than God. That is, well, you said 0.5% of games on Steam aren't successful. Let's cut that by another 100th to the games that are that successful. And then you have the ones where you don't need to worry about, the money or the split or whatever. So make sure that you understand the contract, make sure that you've got good stuff in place, and make sure that you understand where, who has the final call on things, who's going to be able to put pressure on the other in certain situations. And this is all, none of these things should happen in a good relationship, but knowing what the status is going to help keep that relationship good. So for me, that's like the number one thing to ask, along with, what are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me other than just giving me the money to make my game?
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, K.A.? Would you agree?
I definitely agree. Yes, and like Ben said, like, every publisher is different. Like, and this is why it's key to speak to multiple. Even if you're in love with a certain publisher, always speak to multiple, because you always need to contrast and compare, especially if you're still new in the industry. Like, again, you don't know what you don't know, so you might think something sounds amazing until you realize that, actually, wait a minute, all these guys over here are way better at something. So always ask a bunch of questions. And the main thing really is, don't take anything for granted. Like, nothing is given here. Like, ask anything and everything you're possibly curious about, because you can assume the wrong thing and be negatively surprised down the line, and nobody wants to be surprised 6 months or a year into a working relationship. You want to know everything, so ask everything you can, big or small. There's no stupid answer, there's no stupid question, so ask rather too much than too little. And I think one thing that can be really important, I think, is asking a publisher, looking at, again, like, this kind of depends on what kind of studio you are. If you're a multi-team studio, you might have 2 or 3 games in the works at once. Obviously, each one of your games will be less crucial to your company's surviving, right? But a publisher obviously will have kind of a different way of looking at it, where some publishers will do a low number of games, some will do a high number of games, and asking questions that kind of tell you whether they can support the games they're taking on will give you a good picture of, well, is your game important to them, or are you one of 50 they're doing this year, right? Because if you're one of 50, chances are you're just going to be one of them, and then maybe you do well, but maybe you don't. And so asking those questions to make sure that that if you think your game is important, make sure that they feel the same way, if that is what you're looking for, right? So, like, don't take anything for granted. Don't assume anything, and ask all the questions you possibly can. Beyond that, I mean, it's always. I did have a conversation with a developer last week that had worked with another publisher in the past, and they, for instance, told me that they were surprised after the fact that the publisher was underspending on marketing, that they were doing too few QA people. So even ask stuff like that. Again, like, don't assume anything. Make sure you get exactly what you need. Always. It's just only fair.
I think an important thing to add on to that is, we're not, in my experience, we're not trying to screw you. Like, we're not actually trying to hurt you, but we are a business, you are a business, our businesses are slightly different, and what we want out of it are going to be different things. And also, it's a contract negotiation. If we say we'd like X and you just say yes, we're going to take X. But if you don't like X, say so. Like, we're not, we're not trying to screw you, but we are trying to get ourselves a good deal. And we're not going to try and trick you, or at least the good ones aren't going to try and trick you. But we are going to ask for what we want. And if some part of that you don't like, or you don't want, or you think is dodgy, or you need, like, you don't understand it, you want clarity, again, me and K.A., we're business people. Like, we understand at least some of what we're talking about when it comes to contracts and stuff. You, as a game developer, in the same way that maybe you don't know how to use Premiere, or you don't have the email address of somebody at Microsoft, you're not necessarily going to understand everything that's written in legalese on a contract. So just ask. Like, it's totally fine. And never, for the love of God, don't put your name on something that you don't understand, because that's just good advice across
Generally
every,
life.
every industry.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on that. Like the thing about we're not looking to screw you is so fundamental. Like us, like a core kind of tenet of what we do at Fireshine and of how my team is run is that our key goal, one of the key pillars of success with us, is we want developers to come back and do game number 2, game number 3. If we screwed you over on the first game, we will fail on game number 2 and 3 because you won't be around, which means we've massively failed, right? And so it's really important for us that we make deals with developers that work out for everybody, so we can have even more success in the future.
Yeah, I think that's super important to say. And yeah, if you think about it logically, like, so obviously we would say we're not going to screw you because that's what someone who's going to screw you is going to say. But yeah, think about it logically. So we screw you, you're going to tell all your mates, you're going to tell everybody you can find. Maybe you're going to tell Kotaku. Not to mention other games publications are available, and we're not going to get work from other people as well. Maybe our business will stay open, maybe we'll be fine, but we're not. We're going to lose opportunity by doing that. So it's not in our interest to do it, even if we wanted to. Which, well, yeah, we certainly don't.
Yeah.
And I think the last point I want to mention here is, like I said, like nothing is take nothing for granted. Even if we tell you we're not going to screw you, read the contracts you sign in the finest detail and know exactly what you're signing, right? Because you never know. Someone could say, look here, but in reality, they're doing something over here, and you don't want that. So make sure that you read everything. Don't trust anyone until you know that you can trust people. Like, really dive into the contracts and make sure you know what you're doing. And if you don't, find someone to help you, either the publisher or a lawyer or both. Yeah.
Fab. Thank you very much. Okay, so when coming to you, how far do you generally like the game? How far along do you like the game to be in terms of development, K.A.?
It kind of depends. I mean, ideally, we would love something playable, because a lot of video games are about how they feel to play. And so, if someone tells you, "Oh, I'm gonna make Fortnite 2," I'm like, "Great! Can you show me that though?" You know what I mean? Like, that really helps to make sure that it actually is what they say it is, and that it feels good to play. Because sometimes you have games that tick all the boxes, but it just doesn't feel right, and that takes a lot of work and iteration. And if the developer doesn't realize that, there might be a sign that they may not be able to pull off the thing they're saying they can. So some kind of playable that is sort of indicative of what you're working toward is helpful. Now, we're not saying you have to have a game that is 80% finished, because that's nonsense. You probably won't be able to afford doing that.
Yeah.
But something that kind of takes us on a little bit of a journey, thinking, okay, this is where we're going. Ideally a playable that is either indicative of your hook, the thing that makes your game actually different, or at least has some form of the basic core gameplay loop. So again, we can see, okay, you're making a survival game. This actually looks like a survival game.
So would you say there's like a time that is ideal for like the playable?
I mean, it depends. I would, like, depends on how long the core loop is, right? If it's a core loop where, if you look at Cult of the Lamb, for instance, because the game has 2 different parts to it, I would want that build to have both the city building management part and the roguelite part. Because if you only have one of them, the game isn't its USP yet, right? So you need to have both. So it depends. Like, if your core gameplay loop is short, the build could be 10 minutes, totally fine. If it's a deep RPG with a ton of systems, your build might need to be an hour. So it very much depends. But just make sure that it actually shows us why your game is different or interesting or better or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is, if you are a very experienced team, you've done exactly this kind of game before, and you can be like, look, we're making a spiritual success to this game. It's the same genre. We've done it countless times. Then we may not need a build because the proof is right there. You've done it before. Then we're okay. So it kind of depends. Usually, though, a build will go a very long way. It certainly speeds up the process on our end, if nothing else.
Yeah, makes sense. Ben, anything to add?
No, not particularly. I think the important thing is to note is that I think a lot of the time we will say you don't need a playable, but it is pretty rare that you're going to fit into the exact situation where that's actually true. Because, for example, yeah, if you come to us and you're a completely new studio and you don't have a playable, it's going to have to be the best idea I've ever seen for us to like sit down and put money on it, and certainly to fund it all the way. And then on the flip side, if you come to us and you say, oh, we're pitching it around, but we're going to have a playable in 3 months, we're probably going to go, okay, see you in 3 months, because we might as well wait if you can get to that playable stage yourself. So there are situations where we don't need a playable, but it's always better to have one, like in almost every circumstance.
They're pretty rare.
I will say that, and something I will offer to any dev that I speak to, and anyone watching this, of course, is if you're in a stage where you don't have a build yet, you think you've got your idea nailed down, but you might want some feedback on it. Feel free to get in touch. My colleague and I, the two scouts at the company, we're happy to have conversations with developers super early if you'd like to talk through some ideas and see if it might be a future fit for us. And then once the build is ready and we're ready to pitch it internally to my wider company, then we can do that process as well. So there's never a too early to get in touch, but there is a too early, I guess, to realistically get it signed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so along with a playable demo, ideally, what else would you expect a dev to come to you with? Ben?
So there is a few like very, very standard things. Timeline, budget, when's your game going to be done? How much is it going to cost us to get it there? Along with the budget, it is always very, very useful to have some people call it a budget plan. Some people have other names for it, but basically this person is working on the game for this number of hours. We're paying them this much. It's going to cost us this, or, for these number of months or these number of weeks or whatever. And you can get examples of that all over the place. We probably have some we could send you. Various publishers will probably have ones that they can send you that are blank that you just kind of fill in and explain them. So those are kind of the two important things. Then there's the pitch itself and what should be in there. And I mean, again, that's something we could probably talk about for 4 hours as to what exactly should be in your pitch. But you should have some combination of here's our game, here's what it's about, here's what it's like, here's what's important. Here's, if you're focusing on story, your story should be in there. If you're more gameplay focused, you need to have a lot of the mechanics kind of written out. And then some sort of kind of evidence that you have thought about the business side of it. Competitors, maybe the amount you think you're going to sell or the ideas that you have for that kind of thing. Obviously, that's the stuff that we are expert in. And the reason we want to see it from you isn't because we're going to go, oh man, they're going to sell 2 million copies, sign it immediately. It's because if you tell us that you're definitely going to sell 2 million copies of your, roguelike deck builder, we're going to want to know why you think you're definitely going to sell that many, because maybe there are some misunderstandings that you have there about how easy it is to sell that number of copies. So those are kind of the three main things, but there's kind of a lot from there that you can also go with. And often we might come back to you and say, this is cool, we talked about it internally and we like it, we would like to have a call, but also we would like a game design document, like a full kind of up to hundreds of pages of exactly how everything works and stuff like that. So you don't have to have all of that stuff ready, but we might make requests, and if we do, and you might need to put it together relatively quickly.
Okay, anything to add to that?
I want to add to that in saying one thing that I see, especially a lot of early pitches lack, is a visual. Like sometimes to see a deck that has no representation of what the game does or will look like. And I completely understand that oftentimes you're making a game, you may not have any artists yet. Maybe you're a one programmer at the moment. All you have is programmer art. But sure, if you cannot show me what it will look like, at least give me kind of an indication of what you're aiming for, so that we can picture saying, okay, it will be this kind of game at the end. Because someone telling me, oh, it's going to be a pixel art game, it's like, okay, but there are so many different tiers of pixel art. It could be anything. There's so many different levels of quality, if you will, or detail. So have some kind of visual representation for a game. Obviously, if you have actual visuals, put a GIF in there, put a video in there, put something in there so we can see. Because the thing that often happens is we look at, 2,000 games in a year. And so when we do our initial filtering, if I have to read 40 pages to find a small screenshot of a character, that's going to be very hard to sell, versus you give me a GIF and I'm like, boom, I'm in, I love it. You know what I mean? So putting something visual in there is very important. Beyond that, give us information about your team. Ben talked about a budget breakdown of who makes what money and why and where and when. That is super important. But in that breakdown, obviously, also include if you have an office, your office overhead, your software licenses, your hardware, if you need to upgrade something, like all the things you need to pay for, and consider overhead. Because just like a car, you never know when it breaks down and suddenly there are unexpected costs. And so plan for those too. It's quite normal to add 10, maybe even 15% overhead on everything you do. So have your budget breakdown include stuff like that. So again, to show us that that things can go wrong. Because as Ben mentioned before, our job is risk assessment effectively. It's about picking the right things to take a chance on and take risks with. And the more you can show us that you are a risk that is worth taking, and you are in fact aware of the level of risk we're talking about, it makes you less risky, which makes our job easier and makes it more likely to get a game signed. Beyond that, I mean, I think, Ben, you mentioned a timeline. I don't know if you did, but if not, a timeline for, like, you are here in the process, you've worked for a year, how far away is it? Are you planning an early access? When is that going to be, do you think? How long is it going to be? What kind of content are you going to have in there? That kind of stuff. Like, have an idea of what you're making and when and why. And I think the final thing I want to say, which is probably the most important, is make sure you very clearly list your USPs, like actual USPs, unique selling points, for anyone that doesn't know the term. I very, very frequently see a pitch deck that has here like a feature list. It's a first-person shooter where you shoot Nazis in the face. Like, that's great, but none of those are USPs because those games exist, right? They're cool, but there's nothing unique about that. So really think about what makes your game different. Why should we sign that game versus the 500 that might be in the same exact genre and theme? Why is yours different than those? And that's the USP that we need to make your game stand out. And frankly, to make it stand out to us, but also make it stand out to the people who will eventually, hopefully, be paying for it one day. So really consider USPs and make sure they are, in fact, USPs. Have that in the pitch deck as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So just to go from what you were just saying, Sam from No Man's North has asked, does it matter if your game demo you provide looks different from art concepts for the final look of the game? Concepts are easy to generate as you can make them pretty, whereas a demo can fall flat in terms of visuals, but provide a basic idea to mechanics. How do publishers look at the whole picture?
When I was at Focus, and so I used to work for Focus Home Interactive at the time. They're now Focus Entertainment. Obviously, they're pretty significantly bigger than Firesquid are, and than Fireshine are. So we were dealing with games with budgets in the 7 and 8 figures. We would often ask for a prototype, a playable prototype, but also a target render. And the target render was basically an entirely different build that usually didn't have as many or any gameplay elements, but was literally just a finished room level environment that we could walk around in and take a look at. Sometimes it was just a video that was at the very least like 80 to 90% of the way there when it came to the art. With smaller projects, which I expect most of the people watching this are dealing with, you can definitely go, here's our gameplay demo. It looks like crap. That's fine. That's another point I actually want to make is we have seen games that look so much worse than you think your game looks. You have no idea. We are fine with it. It's okay. We are not the public. We're not players. We're not going to overreact because a puddle doesn't have the right reflections on it or whatever. Like, we have seen games that are in dev that are gray box that have a default Unreal character. It's totally fine. So you can send us that, but if you can then also send us mock-up screenshots, concept art, stuff that represents how the game is going to look. What you shouldn't do is send us concept art that you can't make the game look like that. Or if you do, because I mean that does happen all the time. You look at concept art for everything from Blizzard to Valve to whoever. They've got loads of stuff that isn't how the game actually looks. You can send us that, but don't go, it's going to look like this, and then it looks nothing like that. Because it is always a nice surprise, and it's happened more recently, which is nice, when someone sends me something and I see the first shots and I'm like, oh, that's great art, but I wonder how it looks in game, and then that turns out to be an actual screenshot. Because, I mean, artistic direction is very, very important. So, yeah, you can split those up in whatever way makes the most sense for you and your team and how much time you have. But having both is very, very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the visual target is everything. Like, because we are trying to obviously picture what the game will be 2 or 3 years down the line, and everything you can give us to help us imagine that is immensely helpful. And obviously, yes, don't be unrealistic. Like, if your game is not going to be the prettiest game ever made, don't tell me it's going to be the prettiest game ever made. Like, be realistic with what you're making. And obviously, if I see anyone showing a screenshot of a visually stunning game, and I can see in your budget breakdown that you've got 40K for art, I'm gonna ask some questions. So make sure that you can actually do what you think you can do with the money they're asking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just want to quickly go back to you mentioned about having your team in the pitch deck. Okay, is it important to show your team's experience and capabilities? Is that important to you as a publisher?
Yes, I mean, especially the more money you ask for. Again, like, our job, the really to distill it down, is risk assessment. Like, we look at something: is it worth the risk? Is the risk too great or not? And if I can see that the people looking to make a game that, frankly, only an experienced team can pull off is made of a team of experienced devs, I'm like, well, it makes sense that they have done this, or they've worked in AAA before, or they've worked, their previous game was this genre, they're now making the same thing. Makes it infinitely easier for me to say, okay, there stands to reason they can do it again.
Yeah.
And so having a team breakdown is awesome. If you don't yet have a team, try to be transparent about that. If you are one person and you're like, look, I need to hire 2 more, let us know who they are. If you've already spoken to people and say, look, I've got 2 previous contacts in the industry, I've already spoken to them, I've got them on board, if I can secure this money, let us know that as well. So because we often get pitched games where, and see this frequently. I spoke to a colleague about this the other day. Someone's like, yeah, I would like 4 million. I'm one person, I want to hire 30 people. I'm like, I'm not giving you millions to hopefully to hire 30 people and hope that you're going to work out. Like, that's just not sensible. So be realistic with that as well.
Yeah.
You can scale up from where you are, but you're not going to hire thousands of percent of the people you already have. That's just not going to happen. There's so many things can go wrong with that. But yeah, tell us, if your team doesn't exist, tell us who your team will be. If you don't know the people, at least tell us the roles, when you need them for, how much you expect them to cost, that kind of thing. Show us that you know what you need.
Yeah.
A note on that is one pitfall that I saw a few times, and I don't know how relevant this might be for folks here, and I think this has gotten slightly less common because maybe people have realized it, is everyone is X everywhere. So it isn't impressive. Like, I'm not impressed by the games that you have worked on particularly. I mean, it depends. If you are the lead developer of League of Legends or something, then that is notable, but I'm not quite sure why we're having a conversation anyway. But also, if you worked on Call of Duty, cool, but don't think that needs to be like a top line thing in your pitch deck, that from the guys who worked on Call of Duty and so on and so forth, because thousands upon thousands of people work on these games, and maybe you aren't somebody doing this, but people do that, and it's like, yeah, they were a part-time QA tester or something.
Yeah,
and
they
that's
did the lampposts. And
exactly. And that's not to put any dispersion on those roles or those people, but that isn't necessarily going to be super relevant to the game that you're making or whatever. And if you're trying to put that in, or someone's trying to put that in, so that my eyes go, whoa, it's the guys that made game I've heard of, that isn't how it's going to work. I'm going to look you up on LinkedIn and I'm going to see, no, you weren't the lead developer or something. You worked on it. Good. I'm glad you've got the experience, but that isn't going to be like the key thing that gets you hired. It's just the fact that you have experience in the games industry, that you know how things work.
I guess the thing that really matters for anyone, especially if you're looking to upscale your company, is that you actually have, and if you don't have, then tell us, but ideally you will have some experience doing that, right? So if you are 2 people looking to scale up to 10, well, hopefully you have experience leading a team or building a team or doing something that tells me you know how to find the right 8 people to add, and you know how to manage them so they don't quit after 2 weeks. If you have any way of showing me that you know how to do that, definitely focus on that. Because again, it's all about the risk. And if I have no idea if you can manage 8 people, why would I give you money to do it?
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would your tips be for how best to pitch to you guys? Let's start with Ben this time.
So I mean, there's 2 ways pretty much that it happens. One is events. Those can be expensive to attend, but definitely go to the ones that are near you. I met the MLC guys at GI Live, which is a UK-based one that was relatively cheap to attend. And a lot of the kind of incubators and funds and these sorts of things will be able to pay your way into those if you don't want to do it yourself. Events they're a dangerous thing to get addicted to. Like, some people just go to every event and then never make a game. And that's great if you're on the speaking circuit or whatever. But if you're just trying to make your game, you probably don't want to spend all your money that way. But it's a good place to meet people. Like, they all have essentially automated meeting systems. And, so long as you send me a message for your meeting and you say, we're making a game, talk to us, I will almost certainly say yes, or get somebody to meet you, or say, look, I don't have the time, but please email me. And then that's the other thing, is you can just email us and say, hey, we're X, here's our pitch deck, we're making Y, get back to me if you're interested. And we will almost certainly, if your game is not for us at all, we will come back and say, sorry, it doesn't look like it's for us. You're going to get a lot of that, get used to it. It's just life. There are 100 reasons that we will say no to a game without it having anything to do with the game's actual quality, basically. And we can maybe get onto that in a bit. And if we are interested, then yeah, we'll do a call, probably a Google Meet like this, usually 30 minutes, an hour, where we'll probably get you to pitch us the game directly, like through the pitch deck or whatever. And then we'll have some questions that we'll want to ask, and then things will go from there. There'll be more meetings and that sort of thing. So those are the two main ways, but it can kind of come from a lot of different directions. Some publishers have forms that you can kind of put all your game details into, and it goes to somewhere on their side. I started doing that at Focus, and we have one at Firesquid, but it has benefits and drawbacks that I'm still kind of evaluating. I don't know if you've got anything else, K.A., that you know about.
Yeah, I mean, we do have one of those forums as well, so feel free to use that or email us. Or if you want to be less formal, which a lot of devs do, message me on Discord, message me on LinkedIn, message me on Twitter. My DM's open everywhere. So if you want to do a less formal kind of, hey, what's up? You interested in this kind of game? Feel free to do that before it becomes a real conversation, if you will. Happy to do that. One thing to keep in mind, I think, when you're pitching is always, because I get this on the Meet to Match is a platform we use a lot for a lot of these events. And again, it can be very cheap to attend, and a lot of them you can do virtually. You don't have to go anywhere. And I don't burn $100,000 budget in going to events if you can avoid it. It helps. But not everyone has that kind of money at the time to do that. So definitely get in touch. But one thing to keep in mind is that be upfront with what you're making. I regularly get meeting requests for people that are kind of unwilling to tell me what they're wanting to pitch me. And I see so many games. I don't have time to take completely speculative meetings. So I would save all of us a lot of time if you just be very upfront. I'm making this kind of game. Here's my pitch deck. If you're interested, let's have a call. Instead of the other way around, asking for a call first. Because if I 2 minutes into the conversation, keep it like, oh, you're making a mobile game, that's not right for us, we've wasted our time. So it's much better you lead with the pitch deck, get a feeling for, does this potentially fit, and then have a conversation based on that. And like I said, kind of unofficial DMs anywhere is totally fine. But the main one thing to keep in mind is when you reach out is know what you're making, and this is the general thing for everything is know what you're working on. Obviously, like I said, you can reach out if you have an idea and you want feedback on it. But if you realistically want something get signed, have a very clear plan when you pitch what it is you're pitching. If your game design is 5% finished and every question I ask is going to be answered with, I don't know, we'll find out in 6 months. I'm like, why are we talking now? Then we should probably talk in 6 months. So yeah, know what you're making and then reach out any way you feel like, and we can have a chat about it. Even if it goes nowhere, happy to have a chat.
So it turns out it's not as scary as some people make it out to
It
be.
shouldn't be. I mean, obviously, it can be. And like Ben said, like there are 100, if not 1,000, reasons something may not work out. Like applying or reaching out to a publisher is kind of like applying for a job. Imagine applying for 100 jobs and getting rejected 99 times. That is probably the reality of it, right? Because there are so many games, and not every game is a fit for every publisher. So I guess two things to touch on in that regard is, in terms of events, if you go to events, don't do events back to back to back to back to back. Like, try to do one event and then maybe do another one 3 months or 2 months later. And the reason for this is if you go to one event and you get feedback from the event that actually your game, you're missing all this from your pitch deck, the visuals aren't there yet, nobody's interested yet. If you've got another event immediately after, chances are, because you've not had time to do anything about it, you just get the same exact feedback and wasting your time and your money on nothing. So give yourself time between pitches, between events to get feedback, address the feedback, and then try again. Because otherwise, you waste so much time. And what you can also do, which, I mean, you could potentially, if you wanted to, kind of split your publishers into different tiers, like have a tier that's like, I would love to work with these guys, but I would also be happy to work with these guys, and maybe don't start at the top. Because chances are your own pitch, your pitch deck, your build, whatever it might be, aren't perfect yet. The plan is, of course, to get there. If you start with your favorite publisher in the world and they're like, nah, not for us, you might have wasted your chance. So it is better to maybe start with a smaller group, get some initial feedback, hone your pitch, hone your deck, you perfect your build before you have the real conversations that you really think matter. They'll be the perfect match, and then hopefully it'll go a lot better for you. So spread out your pitches as well.
Two things to add to that. One is say you're making a game that's like pretty massive, like bigger than the budgets that me and K.A. would work on.
Although we do 7-digit budgets as well.
K.A. goes huge. Never mind. Well, anyway, so say you're working on something and maybe a couple of publishers that don't usually work in that genre or don't work at those budget levels. At least for me and from what K.A. has said him as well, you can still send it to us and say, hey, what do you think about this? What would you change? What do you think of the pitch? And I've done that already at Firesquid, and I've only been here a couple of months. So perfectly reasonable to reach out in that way. And then I've forgotten what the second point was again. It'll come back. Don't worry about it.
I'll wait for you to interrupt me later.
I guess the last thing to add is the thing about like doing research on who you pitch to, right? Because you will most likely, unless you're making the next Call to the Lamb or something, or Fortnite 2, get in touch if you are. Although not 8-digit budget, then I can't do it. But if like do research on who you're pitching to, because if you pitch to a lot of publishers that aren't the right fit for you, you're setting yourself up for rejection. And obviously, being rejected is always going to be demotivating to some degree. If you get rejected unnecessarily again and again and again because you pitched to the wrong people, your motivation might suffer. And obviously, making a game is several year long process, and you don't want to be demotivated early on. So, yeah, definitely do research for that reason. Don't get yourself burned out for just being rejected too much.
Can we have a little chat about pitch decks? Ben covered it quite a bit about the few things, but could we have a little bit more look at it? For you, what's the most important thing in a pitch deck? What's going to blow your mind? Ben?
Well, if you've got Fortnite 2, like K.A. mentioned, then go for that. So, I mean, I'm a bit of a visual guy when it comes to evaluating games. If the first slide of your pitch deck with the game name has a super sweet logo and a really nice bit of art behind it, and I go, man, I haven't seen that before, or wow, I have seen that before, and loads of people want to buy it, then that's really good. So like that, I think that first slide or the first couple of slides and making sure that one, they look nice, and two, they have relevant information on them is super important. There's nothing I hate more, and this is a bit of a personal peeve, like this might not be true across everywhere, but there is nothing I hate more than opening up a pitch deck, it looks nice, and the first slide is the business case for my game. Great, I'm glad you thought about it, but really, if you're making a game and you're coming at this from you're coming at it from a business angle rather than this is what I want to make angle, then I'm going to have less confidence that your game is going to be really, really good. Because end of the day, and like if you have enough marketing budget, you can sell mediocre games. I'm sure we could all name a few AAA games that we don't believe are of the highest quality, but have sold a lot of copies. Those marketing budgets do not exist for like 99% of publishers. Like we're talking marketing budgets in the 8 figures, like more than we fund entire games for. So the best way for our games to sell really well is to be really, really, really good. Like they need to be good looking, they need to be fun to play, they need to be replayable or provide a lot of value or tell a really, really good story or whatever it is they're trying to do. And that comes from developers who are passionate about their games. That's the best way to get good games, is to have good developers who are passionate about it. So if I open up your pitch deck and it says, this is the most popular genre on Steam as explained by these stats that are half made up because they're from Steam Spy, I'm not going to believe that you are, super passionate about what you're making. I'm going to believe that you're a business person who has seen a good business opportunity. Doesn't mean I'm immediately going to say no, but it isn't how my perfect pitch deck would start.
So show your passion, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
K.A., same for you, or do you look to be different?
Yeah, I mean, I am also very visual. Like if someone pitches to us via a website, for instance, the first 2 things I do is, one, I read the title of the game just in case I already know it. And the second thing, the first link I click of the pitch deck or the Steam page or wherever, the first thing I click is the trailer. Any kind of footage, not because I need to see how the game looks, because again, things will change in development, but I need to see what kind of game it is, what kind of gameplay we're looking at. Does that even fit with Fireshine? If it checks the first box, I'll then dive into everything else. So pull me in with some kind of visual somewhere. And if there isn't one, put one on the pitch deck so I know what kind of game we're talking about, right? Because a roguelite isn't a roguelite these days. There's so many different ones that tells me nothing, right? So I need to see what I'm working on. So very visual for certain. And yes, I would agree with make sure that there is a business case for your game, but don't make a game for a business case. Like definitely make the game first so that you care about what you're making. Because if you design a game based on a trend, are you still going to be passionate about your game after a year when the trend is over and something else is trendy? If you just decided because, oh, now Vampire Survivor is cool, I'm going to make another Vampire Survivor, I'm going to pass on that because that trend will end eventually and we'll get something else.
Yeah, I think an important thing about that whole trend idea is you can do that, and there are developers and publishers who do that, who go, oh, cool, this is being made, we should make our own. Look at Teamfight Tactics, look at battle royales and stuff like that. A, the folks that do that successfully are usually very, very large, and B, if you're not at the very start of let's say making a game takes 2 or 3 years, if you're not right at the start of that, so you immediately start making the game as soon as you realize this genre is going to be popular, you're going to be behind the curve by the time your game actually comes out. So it's possible, but unless you're really, really good at it, don't try and do it, or have a plan for if it isn't going to work. Or best bet is, cool, you like the genre, awesome, make sure your game is also really good.
Yeah, I would say that the whole trend thing, frankly, if again, we had a conversation internally for a while about Vampire Survivor type games, and honestly, if someone were to realistically want that to get signed with us, I would tell them, if you can launch it within 6 months, because I want the trend to still be a trend. Because if it's years away and it's a thing that is very trendy, you're hedging everything on the fact that people haven't moved on by then. If people started making Among Us when Among Us became popular, they were going to be 2 years too late to that conversation, right? So
2 years after Among Us came out.
Exactly. So it's, you have to be, if it's trendy, you have to be fast. And the only way to be fast without making it low quality game is to have a massive team. And I don't know how often those things all kind of fit together. So realistically, don't follow a trend. Make something you like. That obviously also is a business case and can make money, right? Make sure you can make money. Don't make something because it's cool, unless you don't need to make money or make it for fun. But then you probably don't want to work with the publisher anyway.
Yep, all very, very valid points. Okay, so you read the pitch deck and you're impressed. You invite them for pitch. How long should your ideal pitch be, K.A.?
It kind of depends on where we're talking. So a lot of the events that we attend that are via Meet to Match, I'm getting a call. It's about to end warning on Google Meet, by the way. I don't know if that means anything I should worry about. Sure. If we're meeting on a Meet to Match platform, then we probably only have 30 minutes to talk. And in those instances, your pitch should not be more than 10 minutes. So I have time for questions. So if we're meeting in terms of how long a pitch should be, if we're meeting for a 30-minute slot, don't spend more than 10 minutes going through your pitch deck. And ideally, the way I personally look at it, and other game scouts and other companies might view this differently, is if it's a 30-minute meeting at an event, I just want to know a little bit about the game, and then I want a lot about you, because we're not going to have 30 minutes. It's not going to be enough to do a deep dive on anything, frankly. So I personally treat those as more of a meet and greet kind of a meeting. And if we have a good vibe, and if we think, okay, this game could be a good fit for us, then we will schedule a longer 1-hour call, typically, where you can spend a lot more time on the pitch deck, a lot more time about the nitty gritty of your game and your team, and we can talk about us in great detail as well. So it kind of depends. So 30 minutes. If you pitch something proper, don't spend more than 10 minutes. So I have time for questions, so you have time for questions for me. If it's a 1-hour call, you can spend longer, but just, again, make sure that there's time for me to ask something, and obviously time for you to ask me something as well. Because I never want to walk away from a call with me having a lot of info and the dev being none the wiser. We need to all walk away with something so we know, do we want the next step or not?
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with everything you said. One thing to note, and I mean, I don't know, maybe this is me showing some laziness, but a lot of those meetings that are at events, none of the work gets done there. It's all just saying hello to people,
exactly.
meeting people. You know who I am. I know who you are. You get a business card. I get a business card. I'll contact you afterwards. You contact me afterwards. The most important thing I say in a meeting and event is, next step, send me your pitch deck. And that's almost what I say every single time, because that is sort of just how it works. Now, if you're in the right place at the right time and you get a little bit lucky, maybe quite a lot of something will happen there. But a lot of these kind of these 30-minute meetings are not long enough to do anything of note in, and they aren't. It's not going to be with all the people that can make the decision, even if they could make the decision fast enough. So don't plan to do a 25-minute pitch, because A, you might not even get 25 minutes anyway. If I'm running from one end of a convention hall to the other, or if it's at GDC and I'm running from one hotel to the other, the chance of me showing up on time exactly is fairly low. The chance of us both showing up on time is also fairly low.
And you won't be able to, you have to leave early too.
Yeah, and I have to leave early to get to my next meeting and so on and so forth. Those meetings can't overrun. Even if they're in digital, they can't overrun because I'm probably back to back. I've been playing a relatively small event called Game Connection, which is in France. And I've already had to open up 2 slots that I'd closed for lunch to add more people to get more meetings. So I'm going to be back to back at these things. And and whatever half hour, 15 minutes I've booked aside to have some food, you and everybody else I'm meeting that day really wants to make sure that I get that food, because otherwise we're not going to have a good conversation. I can tell you that. So just assume that those meetings are really valuable for saying hello to people, not really valuable for getting everything about your game across.
Yeah, and I will say to that, like, especially because we are very frequently back to back. Like, an example of that was Gamescom this year. I was down for 2 days. I had 30 meetings in 2 days. That was back to back all day, both days, and then back home. Obviously, I will remember the games that personally stood out to me. I'll remember everything from. But realistically, there's no way I'll remember everything that was said in a 30-minute call 30 times, right? So, or 30-minute conversation. I will not remember everything anyway. Whereas if I have a digital meet with you, I will take furious notes and I will have all the details. So it's more worthwhile, as we've both said now, like, consider the small ones at events as a hi, how are you, nice to meet you kind of a thing, a vibe check, if you will, and then have a real conversations when you sit down, show your pitch deck, talk through everything, and ask the harder questions that you may not want to do in public or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So don't use events to actually pitch to you, really. Just
not really.
Network.
Get a check if it might work for the publisher, but no decisions, like Ben said, no decisions are going to be made there regardless.
And if we do want to have a longer meeting at an event for whatever reason, maybe we've already had a pitch and the event is the follow-up thing, we'll make it longer, or we'll plan it, or we'll do it outside of the event. Because I mean, that's the other thing, is these events have the scheduled time of 9 till 6 or whatever. We're probably also doing business in the evenings or in the mornings or whatever if we need to. Like, you know, we're kind of working 18-hour days when we're at these things, because that's just the way it is for us. So yeah, you know, if we need to take an hour somewhere, we'll find the hour. It just won't be one of these 20-minute, 30-minute slots or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I was looking, we've got quite a lot of questions in the channel. Are you guys in the channel?
Yes.
Okay, should we just start from the top? What are the common pitfalls for new studios, indie studios, should avoid while negotiating with a potential publisher? Why do some publishers not provide a capital at all? And how to avoid predatory deal contracts? What to look out for?
Goodness me. I think the number one pitfall is where in a process you look for a publisher. I think actually there is a sweet spot like we spoke about, and there is also a lot of room on the sides of there. But a lot of people are at the absolute extremes where it's really not good. And so, all right, brutal truth time. If your game's out on early access and you've failed, for want of a better term, just don't bother. We're not going to say yes. I have never met anybody that would say yes to that project. I'm sure there is an example where it would have worked, or it could work, or it would work. The chance of it being you is incredibly low. If you've gotten all that distance and it hasn't gone well, and you think a publisher is going to be able to come in and help you, again, unless something's very weird's going on, that's just not going to be the case. I'm sorry, it's just the reality of it. I hate it when devs come along with that stuff, not because I hate them, but because I hate the fact that I've got to be the guy that goes, no, sorry, you've messed this up, and there's nothing we can do to help, and there's nothing you can do, basically. So if you're at that extreme end, no, we can't help. And then if you're at the other extreme end, and this comes back to a lot of what we were talking about already, you know, if you're just a guy with an idea, cool, me too, but like, you need to start putting some stuff together. You need to start coding the game. You need to start getting the company together. And there are other folks that can help you do that. And we're much more able to help at this point than we're able to help at the other extreme end, because we can at least say, oh yeah, go talk to this person. Oh yeah, try this. Oh, talk to this grant. But yeah, like those two extreme ends, we can't help too much. And then the other thing that in that subject is like whether a game's already been announced or not. There is a lot of stuff around this. I used to be, and I think the bigger the company, the more they're in this category where we're just like, don't announce your game. Don't just come and talk to us about it. Do not announce it. Don't have anything public about it. The smaller you get, the less important that is. And obviously, if you've announced your game and loads of people are super excited for it, then we're probably going to want to come on board. But you also, A, might not need us, and B, other people who are bigger than us or can do better deals or whatever are going to also be interested and also maybe will be vastly preferable for you. So that is like a debate to have. The bigger folks aren't going to want your game to be announced unless you announcing it has generated a very significant amount of revenue, because folks like Jeff Keighley, folks like Xbox, folks like PlayStation, when they put games on their big shows to get a lot of attention on them, if they can put that big world premiere over it, they vastly prefer that. And you're vastly more likely to be able to get into their shows by doing that. It doesn't completely remove any options, because most of these shows you can also pay to get into, but it is vastly, vastly helpful if your game has not been announced, because it means we can control the full marketing, we can control the full message, and we can get it into places that we can't get it otherwise. And as I said right back at the start, you are probably not an expert marketer if you're an expert game developer. There's very few people that are really, really good at both. And honestly, if they are, a lot of them don't need publishers. So if we can do all the marketing, we prefer that. Again, that is not as hard and fast a rule for me now as it would have been when I was at Focus, but it is a pretty good piece of advice that I do like to give. And again, you can be like, oh, I've got a plan to announce my game. Nothing stopping you from going and talking to publishers beforehand. Doing a round of publisher meetings, while we're talking about the amount of time and effort it takes to make a game, that bit can probably take a month. Like if you just go, okay, this month I'm going to get together a nice pitch deck or a decent pitch deck or whatever, get together a little bit of info and start sending out to publishers. That isn't taking that much time away from your larger plan. And if you don't get any interest, then maybe you can announce your game anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And this is the thing, you only have one chance to make a first impression, whether that is announcing something. If you announce something nobody cares, some publishers might read into that as saying, well, nobody cares, why would we publish it then? And obviously there are a lot of things that factor in. We do take on games all the time that don't have a lot of wish lists, even though they are announced, because we're like, well, they clearly not really done anything with it yet. The game exists, but nobody knows. That's why it's not yet getting much traction. So it depends. But obviously, if we can see that you announced your game, you've been at 10 events and nobody cared, that's going to be an alarm bell. That means that we can amplify this, but amplifying nothing is still nothing. So there's just no value in us doing that. And the same thing with, if your game is already out, that ship will have sailed. The publisher's job is to amplify your game. If your game is 200 sales in early access, we're not going to amplify that by much, are we? So once it's out, it's out. You have one chance to launch. You have one chance to announce. Use it well. And definitely, yes, check with the publisher or advisors or whoever is around you. Check with them before you do anything. Because once you've done it, and there's no way of going back. I would always hold back with everything you can, unless you desperately, if you're announcing to get someone's attention, I get it, but you can get publishers' attention without doing that. Because there are all these events you could attend. Send us an email. There are a lot of resources online that can show you who you can reach out to, where to find them, how to do it. So do that before you use your one shot to announce too early. Or God forbid, launch too early and with nobody knowing about it. I guess the other thing about the question, in terms of pitfalls, you make sure that a publisher has enough time to do anything. Don't sign a deal, at least for us and publishers like us. If your game is out in 3 months, I wouldn't sign with anybody, because there's nobody can do anything in 3 months. You need to be able to give them more time. Otherwise, you're probably giving away a huge chunk of your profits to a publisher that's going to be able to achieve very little in very little time. So always give a publisher as much time as you can, so you get more for your money, because you are not paying directly, but you're giving up a chunk of your game. Make sure you maximize what you get in return. And
so what's the sweet spot with that? What would you say is the ideal time?
Basically, there's no time that's too early, but we would like a game to be a year out. Ideally, there are cases we're looking at stuff for next year. For instance, we're currently closing out 23. We're looking at stuff that comes out in less than a year, so that it can work, but it is certainly way easier if you know, okay, we've got at least a year, so we can every single event is still a possibility. Every single avenue to get this game out there is still a possibility. So at least a year before launch is ideal.
I think 6 months is probably an absolute minimum.
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
6 months. I would not even pitch that internally. If it's out in less than 6 months, I wouldn't even bother, because even if we wanted that game, I don't think any publisher confidently say, yeah, we can get this from nothing to 100%
it would have to
in
be
6 months or less.
really
There's just no time.
case, yeah.
Especially because actually, from you get pitched until you sign something can take 1, 2, 3 months. And so if your game is out in 3 months and you spend half the time just signing the contract, what are you going to do in 3 months? Almost nothing is the answer. And you're just throwing away a big chunk of your money for nothing, or for next to nothing. And I would never do that. I'd rather figure out a way to say, look, let's delay it by a year, increase our ask, get more money, make a bigger and better game, and give the publisher the time they need to make your game a bigger success.
This is actually a really good point I wanted to talk about at some point, so now's probably a good time to do it. Is sometimes you will go to a publisher and they will go, this is awesome, we want to give you more time and money. And that is, you should be delighted to hear that. Like, that's the best thing ever. But it's a very good point. If you're making a game that's like, say you're a 1-person or 2-person dev team, so your budget's like 100K, like to pay yourselves for a year or whatever, you should have a plan if a publisher comes to you and says, look, this is great, but we want to put more money in because, so again, on this kind of risk assessment type thing, the reason we want to put more money in is we put more money in, the game is better, the time and effort that we spend on it, the marketing resources we spend on it are more worth it. It's basically all a multiplier. It makes sense, I promise, don't worry. So you should probably have a plan for like additional scope or additional features or whatever that you can add that makes sense if you get a little bit more money. Now, some games that isn't true of. If you're making a purely kind of narrative like type thing, maybe you can't just kind of add stuff on top, but you can probably add more voice acting, better animations, more writing, more quests, more side stories, a nicer art, better, characters, whatever it is. Like all of this stuff is money. This is an important thing. I think all developers realize it. The public definitely doesn't. Everything is just money. It's just people that you pay to do things, right? So knowing what you could do with more budget, knowing what you could do with additional scope, if you're in those low bands of like low 6 figures and below, is pretty good to know. And that's the other thing. Like maybe you're thinking and you're going, oh man, my game's out in 3 months, I shouldn't even bother talking to publishers. You maybe should, but with the understanding that if you're talking to publishers, they're going to go, okay, but we're going to delay it a year and we want to do this and that and add this stuff on top. Maybe you had a DLC plan and we're like, okay, half of that DLC, just wrap it into the main game. That'll be the main game. And the other half of the DLC we'll do later or whatever. So a lot of these things are they're all options. All of these things are options. Like you can do or not do anything that you like, and you just need to find the right people to do the deal with.
Obviously, just to add to that, make sure that if you have a plan for extending development, that you actually want to do that. Because the worst thing you can do is, oh yeah, I'll sign a contract saying I'm going to work on this for 2 more years. If you're already very burned out in your idea, you're 6 years in, you're like, I just want to finish this and move on. Yeah. Don't extend. Figure out a way to mitigate your own potential loss if you end up, and then try to work on something that you are more passionate about. Because don't be stuck on something if you're burned out. Definitely. So make sure that if you offer something, you're actually up for it. Don't feel forced to sign anything because you think, oh, that's my only option. There are always a lot of options. You just got to talk about it and figure it out.
We've had that same.
Great, thank you. I've got one down at the bottom about how to protect the rights of the authors of the IP. Do you have any tips on that one? Ben, let's go with you first.
So IP is one of those sliders that I talked about, where the ownership and the whoever has control of it is important. Now, I'm sure everybody is aware of the Zaum situation, although exactly what happened I don't think is public, honestly. We have a lot of sides of a story that I think has a lot of sides.
Disco Elysium, for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, sorry, the Disco Elysium Zaum situation, yeah. We had a similar situation at Focus that you can find the details of online and that I won't speak any more specifically about. That sort of stuff is not often in the control of the publisher, because that is about the personal rights to something that have been given from an individual to a company, and that is about you and your company and your rights and so on and so forth. If you're dealing with the publisher, what we can do is we can talk about okay, who's got the rights to this IP, who is buying that or owning it or part owning it as part of the deal that we're doing, and that can be pretty much anything from the publisher gets full ownership to you retain full ownership and everything in between. And the stuff in between can be part ownership for the publisher. So say we take 10% of the IP, that means anything that you make in the future with the IP, we will take some cut of, maybe 10%, maybe not, depending on the specifics. But it might not necessarily have to be with us. or it could just be a right of first refusal. And this is pretty much the minimum that most publishers will ask for, which is you make a game with us, it does really well, you want to make a sequel, you at least have to come to us and we have to say no before you can go with somebody else. Because, for example, you could be like, we're going to make a game that's 10 times bigger than our last one. And we're like, we can't afford that. Good luck. And that's fine. That's a totally fine situation to be in. We at Firesquid we're not super interested in buying IP. We find it's very, very important for developers to hold on to it. A lot of people care a lot about it. It's the best games are made by the best developers who are the most passionate about their projects. The ones who are the most passionate about their projects probably want to keep hold of the IP. So we find that it isn't a slider that we personally want to move a lot. If they're interested in moving it a lot, then cool, we can talk about it. But for example, the bigger publishers who have access to more teams, who have access to more money, they might want to own the IP because it means that if you make a successful game, not only can you work on the sequel, but another studio can work on a spin-off, another studio can work on a mobile game, and another studio can work on, a VR game or whatever. Don't sign anything you're not happy with. Read what you're signing. Ask questions. The usual advice on this sort of thing. And then, yeah, anything to do with the IP that is to do with you and how you own it and how much the company owns and how much your business partner owns. I personally am now quite careful about that stuff after personal experiences, but it isn't something that we as the publisher control. We're making a deal with an entity who claims or does own the IP. Anything else about it is not entirely up to us, basically. Again, we can give advice, and if there are red flags there, we're going to ask some questions, but it isn't necessarily going to be something that we're going to be able to control.
In terms of advice you can give, do you guys help with the legal side of things? We've got a couple of questions here about legal stuff. So as a publisher, do you help your devs with legal issues? K.A.?
If it's related to developing the game, yes. If they got into a car accident, I don't think we would. But yes, if it's related to this, we certainly have. I mean, we obviously have our own lawyer that work with, and this goes even for potential partners. Where if there's a developer that we're looking to onboard but haven't signed anything yet, we haven't done it yet, we're still happy to work with our lawyer if need be to get any input that they need, help get them to explain any part of the contract or any part of a legal situation they might be in, so they fully understand, again, what it is they're signing. Like, don't sign something you don't understand exactly what it means, right? And so we're happy to offer our services on that front. Obviously, we're not just a free legal advice company. So if it's related to the games you're looking to sign, yes, we can help facilitate that kind of stuff. And again, the emphasis is always on ensuring that anyone we work with or could potentially work with in the future is around in the future to do so. So we're never looking to screw anyone over. We're always going to be honest and transparent with that stuff, because that's how you get repeat business. And we are, at the end of the day, all business is looking to make money, so that part matters.
And you, Ben, anything to add?
No, 100% agree.
Fab. How do you evaluate the video game application? Ben?
As in, how do we evaluate a pitch kind of from start to finish?
I think this is more about the actual game, when you're actually
we're playing it and we're like, what do we think? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that depends so much on what the game is. I personally, like K.A. said earlier, I will look at the trailer first. And here's a little spoiler for you. I often look at trailers muted because I am listening to music and I don't want to pause it if the trailer isn't interesting. And again, we get 500 pitches in a day or whatever. So I will look at stuff like that. If my interest is piqued by the trailer or by the pitch or whatever, or if the trailer is interesting, I will, I'll go to the barest minimum of unmuting it and taking a look at it. So we go through a lot of that stuff first. We do play. I mean, I play most of the builds I receive, unless it's for stuff that is just completely not interesting to us at all. We'll look at any instructions that we get, but we would hope that most prototypes, because we play a lot of games, we should kind of understand how to play them somewhat intrinsically. And if they're completely messed up or whatever, that's usually a pretty, a bit of a red flag that we need to ask questions about. And then, we'll just play it start to finish, whatever it is that you've got there. We will evaluate pretty much everything that we can. How does it look? How does it feel? What are the pain points? What we won't pay too much attention to is individual little bits of graphics, details, little bugs, clipping errors, often I quite enjoy finding that stuff because, in a modern, if I'm testing a third-person game, there aren't a lot of big budget third-person games where you randomly clip through the floor and fall into the abyss. And when that happens, it's just funny. It's not a huge deal. Now, if you've got an hour-long demo and that happens 55 minutes into the demo and there's no save structure, I'm probably not going to go back through that hour to see your last 5 minutes, and I'll probably let you know. But again, that kind of thing isn't going to massively negatively impact. What's going to negatively impact is if it literally doesn't work, or if you haven't sent me instructions and I can't work out how to play it. It isn't fun. There should be some amount of fun there if it's a game that's designed to be fun. And I would say 90% of the games that we're likely to fund are ones that are designed to be fun. And anything that you say is final or near final, I'm going to judge as if it's final. I'm going to go, if I was a player playing this, how would I think about it? Anything that clearly isn't final, I'm going to think about it in terms of a publisher evaluating a game and go, okay, how close to final is this? Is this something I need to ask them about? Do I need to go, oh, okay, so is this writing finished, or is this stuff that you've written and you're getting a writer in to do this? Because if this is done, we need to have a conversation about it. If you're going to get a writer to replace all this, cool. Stuff like that. So, we're going to evaluate each element based on the state the game is at and based on what you've said about it, I think is the two important points.
I will echo that. It's all about the context that we're given, right? If we're told something is, if someone says, oh, the core gameplay here is fine, but everything else is placeholder, then I know this, and then that's how we evaluate the game, right? But yeah, if and this is where the timeline that we talked about earlier in the pitch deck is so helpful. If I can see, if you're like, oh yeah, my game is out in 3 months and everything is gray box, I'm like, okay, so you're gonna make a whole game in 3 months? That's not gonna work. But if I can see that it's playable, but everything is placeholder, and the game is 3 years out, I'm like, okay, cool. I mean, I expected that. That's totally fine. So that context really matters. So we know what are we looking at, what state is this at, and it really helps myself, because obviously for us, once I have played something or my colleague has played something, we will ask our wider team to play something, and we will want to make sure that we give them the appropriate context, because they've not been present for the 1 hour call with the dev or the meeting or the event where we met them or anything, so they don't have all the unspoken or sometimes spoken but unwritten context. So I need the kind of context to say, here's to my team, here's what we know, here's the state it's in, keep these things in mind when you play it. So the more context we can get across everything is really helpful. Make sure that we look at it the right way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a question I was asked last week was more about budgets. Like how does an indie dev go about working out or calculating a budget for a game? K.A.?
I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier about the budget breakdown. Like, you have to consider everything. Like, this is, like I said before, this is like having a car. Like, you expect the unexpected, right? So you budget for everything you know will happen, which will be, you need to pay salaries. If you have an office, you need to pay for that. You probably need to pay pensions, taxes. You have software licenses. You might replace hardware. If you're setting up an office, you might have costs in, I need new chairs or new desks, whatever. Account for everything, so we know that you've thought about it, you know about it, and make sure that it's overhead. And this is the key thing. Like, we personally, when we set up a forecast or an ROI for a game, we add overhead ourselves, just because games slip all the time, things take longer than you think, and you always expect kind of the worst case. But it's always helpful and good if a developer themselves shows us and just is aware themselves that things will slip, that you can plan your way out of most things, but not everything. And so having overhead in your production, no matter what it is always helpful. And showing us, here's my 10 or 15% overhead, just in case I need it, is really important. And yeah, I mean, be realistic. If you've never made a game before and you're trying to set up a studio, speak to people who have done what you're trying to do. Don't just guess. If you tell me, oh, I think I'll need 40 grand for art, it turns out being 250, that's going to be a very strange conversation down the line for us to have. So try to, the things you don't know, find people who do know, ask the questions, and help them make an informed kind of breakdown for us. And obviously, if we look at something that looks weird, we're going to ask the question anyway, and then we're going to have a conversation about it. Because, yeah, if you're making a game that looks like it should be, if it's a genre that should be AA, but you're spending 200 grand making it, there's just no way you're going to make that to a quality that's going to sell. So that factors into it as well. So make sure that the thing you're making can actually be achieved with the money you're looking for. And vice versa. Like, don't pitch a game that will sell 50,000 copies, but expect $5 million budget to do it, because it's never going to make its money back. So be realistic. But the key thing to keep in mind is be realistic with what you need. Don't make the number so high that you scare away a lot of people. Don't make it so low that you're going to suffer long term. Because again, if you burn out because you're poor and you're 2 years into living on noodles, that's not a great look for us as a publisher, and it sucks for you as a developer. So be really, really honest with what you need, and be honest with yourself, so you don't undercut or overestimate anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben's unmuted. It makes me think he wants to speak.
I think just to one back up the point that K.A. made about, we see a budget, we add 20%, and we see a timeline, and we add half a year. Like, not always and not completely, but that is what we're thinking. That isn't because we don't trust you. It's not because we think you're liars. It's because we've made a bunch of games and we know how game development goes. And we're very, very happy if our calculations are wrong on that. If you don't use an extra 20% and so on. I think what that also means for you is, like, it doesn't matter exactly, like, we're releasing in October of 2024. For me, that's a quarter or a half of a year. Like, I don't need to know the exact month. My budget is exactly $1.256 million. Okay, your budget's $1,300,000. It's maybe 1.5-ish. That's how we're going to think about it. So, do be precise, do get these things together. But if you're like, oh man, is that going to be like, and this depends on your budget of your game, but you're making a $2 million game, is that going to be like 50K or 60K? Who cares? Just put 60K. Fine. Those kind of minutia of the budget aren't going to matter this far out. It's about the big picture of what you're looking at, and seeing that you've put the effort in to work it out in a base way. But don't stress over every dollar and exactly how it's being spent. Just like K.A. said, put you just think about as much stuff as you can and put it all in there, and go from there.
Great, thanks. Also, somebody said a lot of people are thinking about making an online game for their first game without taking into account the high cost and complexity of programming. Do you think that it's a good idea for indie devs to make online games?
I mean, I don't want to say no.
I want to say no, unless you have, if you worked in AAA or somewhere and you specifically are a network infrastructure developer and you've done multiplayer games for 10 years, by all means, go for it. But the big thing to remember is that most indie publishers, they work in all things considered, relatively modest budgets. And if you have a budget that is $500,000 and you need another $300K to maintain and to create and maintain an online game for 2 years, then you're ballooning a game by quite a lot in terms of budget. And the thing that can often happen, because again, most games fail, even with a publisher, most games fail if you are kind of if you're on the hook for so much infrastructure, your whole game relies on being online, and it sells nothing at launch. Your game, you're over. It's done. And the thing that very easily happens with multiplayer games, especially on Steam, is that you hit a negative review spiral that is almost impossible to get out of. Because if people buy a game at launch, it could be amazing, but if you get a negative review or you get 100 negative reviews that are like, this game is dead, don't buy it. Getting out of that spiral on Steam is almost impossible. You
would have to literally pay people to play your game, and people have, and it still hasn't worked sometimes.
Famously, it took No Man's Sky 4-5 years to get back into the positive on Steam, even though they've done 5 years of free updates. It took them that long to get back.
That notably didn't have multiplayer.
Exactly. So imagine a smaller game, smaller team, smaller budget, smaller timeline. There's just no way to save that. So you can do it, but I would advise you don't. Frankly, it's going to be so risky.
It 100% depends on what you mean by online and what you mean by multiplayer.
Sure.
Yeah, if you're trying to make Quake or
if you're actually making Fortnite too, don't.
Yeah, exactly. If you're making a game that needs 60 people, 20 people in a match, and that's the only way to play, and that's it. No, almost certainly no. And just for example, we made a few games like that at Focus. Some of them did okay. A few of them really did, even with the backing of Focus, and we were not morons. And I signed these games, or some of these games, we still couldn't get them the traction they needed to do really well. Even though one of them I loved, I thought it was a great battle royale, and we did it at the wrong time. And we got into the negative review spiral, and there's no coming out. However, if you are making a mostly single player game, but you want to have online stats, leaderboards, friend modes. Even if you're making, I've been playing a lot of Marvel Snap recently. Now, I'm not saying try and make Marvel Snap because making card games is hard, but something that's very like one-on-one, quick play time and stuff like that. That is very far away from this kind of battle royale type thing. And if you have some way to play single player that people can play if they like it, and there aren't other people to play with at the moment, or that's the main focus of the game, then you're in a much, much better spot. So yeah, don't go chasing the multiplayer genres. That almost certainly isn't gonna work. But having some sort of online features, if you can do it easily, or if you know how to do it, or if there are pretty decent service providers for a lot of this stuff, particularly Amazon and Microsoft have their own like whole things for these things. And even Microsoft do it for free up to a certain amount of kind of stuff that they're providing. That is interesting and exciting. So you want to have online features? Cool. You want to make a purely online game? Yeah, listen to K.A. Probably not.
Yeah, online only is just so risky in the indie space. Even in AAA, I mean, Ubisoft just a few years ago launched a battle royale and nobody cared, and then lost them, I don't know how many tens of millions, I'm sure. So like, not even AAA can pull it off with success every time, and they put 10 times the marketing budget that we put in the whole games when we go big. So it's just so. Yeah, but yes, I definitely echo. If you're doing a game that can be played solo but has multiplayer, by all means, we love those games as well. But plan for the game not to have a massive pickup at launch. If it's a game that requires 8 players, for instance, if it's like a match, like a competitive thing, think about what it might look like with AI filling in for players if there are no players, so that you don't get this game is dead, I can't play it feedback loop, which will kill you in terms of your game. It'll be
I mean, just look at the laundry list of AAA, PUBG, Overwatch, Hearthstone, and StarCraft clones that failed. The answer with the StarCraft ones is all of them. The answer with the PUBG ones is like all of them but 2. And the others are they're not doing great either. So yeah, just look at those. Think about the fact that the budgets for the games were 100 times what you're going to be spending, and be sensible.
Right, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go for one last question. We've done online. What about VR? What's your thoughts on VR games, Ben?
Once VR is a little chip in your head that you turn on, and then you're in VR and it works, I will be all about VR games. While it is a sensory deprivation headset that costs £200 that runs exactly 2 games that anybody cares about, which is Half-Life Alyx and Beat Saber, it's dangerous. It's like developing for the Ouya or mobile in 2001. Like it's not a no, but also there are particular VR publishers that do those things, that know exactly what those markets want. It is now actually doing better than I thought it would do. I thought it was going to completely crash and burn. Before I tried it, I thought it was completely screwed. Once I tried it, I was like, okay, this is pretty amazing, but it isn't. It's a lot harder to get into. Like you put the headset on, you have to stand up, you have to have the room, and so on and so forth. Whereas, example again, I've been playing Marvel Snap recently. You just boot it up and play it, and it's done, and it's ready, and it's good to go. You can't really have quick play sessions like that with something like VR because the time to get into it's so much longer. So
yeah, and your market's much smaller as well, obviously.
Yeah, and your market is tiny.
Exactly. You're in a niche before you've even defined what your game is, which is the biggest issue, right? You're looking at what 5% maybe of the global player base, and then you've got a niche within that's your genre, and then a niche that's your theme, and then so obviously if you make a great VR game, by all means speak to VR publishers. We're not one of them. We've never done VR. We're not looking to explore that area right now. There are way better options. There are great VR publishers out there. So if you have something awesome cooking, speak to them. I'm sure they can help you make something awesome. But yes, it is a niche. Within a niche, so keep that in mind, and obviously design around it, and if you have a cool idea, you might find success.
And I think don't make your game VR because you're like, oh cool, VR.
Make VR if it's a VR game. You know what I mean?
Beat Saber is a VR game. That's what's interesting about Half-Life Alyx, is that was just a Half-Life game, but then they made it a VR game. But also they're Valve, they're literally Valve, so they get to do that. You don't get to do that. If you have a cool idea for a game and you're like, oh, maybe we could put it in VR, probably just make a cool game, and then you get to talk to me and K.A. about it, and dozens upon dozens of other publishers, and you can still talk to those VR publishers, and maybe they'll be like, no, do this in VR, we will give you twice your budget or whatever, and then it's good for you. And make the best business decision you can. VR is not it's not something you can just throw in and be like, cool, that's going to help us make money, because it reduces your population, not increases.
Yeah. Right, that's our time up. I can't thank you guys enough. It's been brilliant talking with you, and I hope everyone's found it useful. So I'm going to pop, if you don't mind, I'm going to pop your names into our question channel just in case anyone wants to get in contact.
Sure. Yeah, feel free to send a DM or anything anytime. I'm happy to.
Yeah, I know there's a bunch of questions we didn't get
Even
to.
if it's just a follow-up question or a game you want to pitch, just get in touch. It's fine.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Cheers.
You too.
Bye.
Bye, guys.